You don't belong here. The words echoed in Bianca's mind, long after the doors to the bank had slammed shut behind her. She was standing in the very lobby of the bank she had built from the ground up, the place that bore her name, the place where she had poured every ounce of her energy, ambition, and sacrifices. Bianca Williams was no stranger to hardship. She knew the sting of being underestimated, the weight of prejudice, and the burden of walking into rooms where her worth was questioned, not because of her abilities but because of the color of her skin. But this was different. Bianca wasn't just a CEO. She was a woman who had defied the odds, shattered barriers, and turned the tables in an industry dominated by powerful men, most of whom were white. She had fought tooth and nail for her place in the financial world, carving out a legacy that no one could deny. Yet here she was, denied service in the very institution she had spent years nurturing. Her heart raced as she replayed the moment in her mind. Bianca had walked into the bank just like any other customer, dressed in a sharp black suit that screamed authority. She was the CEO of one of the most successful black-owned financial institutions in the country, and she had every right to expect respect. But the moment she stepped up to the counter, the cashier, a young woman with blonde hair and a name tag that read Ashley, had given her a skeptical glance, as if she didn't belong. "Can I help you?" Ashley asked, her voice flat and dismissive, as though Bianca's presence in the bank was an inconvenience. "I'm here to speak with someone about an urgent matter," Bianca had replied, her tone measured but tinged with frustration. She wasn't going to let anyone treat her like she was just another black woman in a suit. She was here on business, and she demanded respect. Ashley eyed her suspiciously, her eyes lingering on Bianca's every movement, as if to say, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here? What exactly do you need?" Ashley asked, her gaze now sweeping over Bianca's clothes as if she were somehow less than her peers. "I need to speak with the branch manager," Bianca said, standing tall, her posture unyielding. But instead of directing her to the office as she should have, Ashley pointed to the small seating area in the corner. "You'll have to wait." Bianca's pulse quickened. This wasn't just an unfortunate encounter. It was the result of years of systemic disrespect, both subtle and overt, that she had had to fight her entire career. She knew this game, this power play, all too well. The dismissal, the doubt, the implication that her presence was somehow less legitimate than that of others. As she sat down in the uncomfortable chair, her mind raced. She could feel her blood boiling, but she kept her cool, refusing to let them see her anger. She had built this empire, this bank, with sheer determination. She was the boss here. No one was going to treat her like this. Minutes turned into what felt like hours before a tall, impeccably dressed man in his early 50s approached. His name tag read Charles, the branch manager. He looked at her with a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Charles asked, his tone overly formal, as if he wasn't sure whether he should even acknowledge her presence. Bianca stood up, walking toward him with quiet authority. Her eyes locked with his, and for a moment, she wondered if he was trying to size her up, as if wondering whether she was someone who belonged in his world. She could see it in the way he looked at her, the way his gaze flickered downward to her shoes and back up to her face, as if measuring her. "I'm the CEO of this bank," she said, her voice unwavering, every word deliberately chosen. "And I demand to know why I was just treated like I don't belong here." Charles blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, trying to brush off her accusation with a wave of his hand. "Ashley is new here. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Bianca's voice rose, steady but commanding. "I don't care if Ashley is new. This kind of treatment, this assumption that I don't belong here, is unacceptable. It's part of the reason I've worked so hard to get to where I am today. So I don't have to tolerate people looking at me like I'm invisible, like I'm somehow not worthy of being in this space." Charles shifted uncomfortably, his face reddening. He had no idea who he was dealing with. But Bianca wasn't done yet. "You're the branch manager, right?" she asked, her tone cold. "Then let me make this very clear. If you allow this kind of behavior to go unchecked, you'll lose your job. No one, not even the most powerful men in this industry, are beyond reproach." For a moment, the room fell silent. The tension was palpable. Charles's eyes darted nervously, and Bianca could see the shift in his demeanor. He had underestimated her, and now the power was in her hands. Charles opened his mouth to speak, But before he could respond, Bianca's assistant, Jamal, walked into the room, his expression calm but his presence commanding. He was carrying a tablet in his hand, something Bianca had instructed him to bring in case the situation escalated. "Ms. Williams," Jamal said, his voice smooth but firm. "The board has been notified of the incident, and they are prepared to take immediate action." Bianca turned her attention back to Charles, who was now visibly sweating. He was realizing the weight of the mistake he had just made. She wasn't some powerless woman who could be pushed around. She was the force behind the bank, the very reason it had flourished. She wasn't going to let anyone, not even the branch manager, disrespect her or her vision. "Charles," Bianca said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife, "you'll be leaving here today. You've lost your job, effective immediately. And you'll be made aware of the full extent of the board's decision once you step out of this room." Charles's mouth dropped open. His face flushed, and he looked like he had been slapped. He had never expected a confrontation like this, certainly not with someone who was supposed to be beneath him in the power hierarchy. I don't think you understand," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I can." "No," Bianca interrupted, her gaze hardening. "I understand perfectly well. You misjudged me, and you'll pay for it." Charles stood there for a long moment, as if debating whether to argue further. But Bianca's eyes left no room for doubt. She had the final word, and she had no intention of backing down. Jamal stepped forward, holding up the tablet. "The board has made their decision," he said simply. "You're done here, Charles." It was over. Charles turned and walked away, defeated. The power dynamics had shifted in that room, and he was no longer the one in control. As Bianca watched him leave, a sense of triumph washed over her. It wasn't just about winning this one battle. It was about sending a message. No matter how high up the ladder you climb, no matter how entrenched the systems of power seem, there will always be someone who will rise up and challenge it. Bianca had fought for her place in this world, and no one would ever take it from her. She had taken back her power. And Charles, he would never make the mistake of underestimating her, or any black woman, again. Bianca stood in the now silent lobby of her bank, the echoes of Charles's departure still reverberating in the air. She could feel the weight of the moment, the power shift that had just occurred. But this wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been looked down upon, underestimated, or cast aside because of their race. As she took a steadying breath, she felt Jamal's reassuring presence beside her. He was a trusted ally, a colleague who had witnessed her struggles from the very beginning. He knew what this moment meant, not just for Bianca, but for the future of the bank. "Do you think he'll make a scene?" Jamal asked quietly, his gaze flicking toward the door through which Charles had just exited. Bianca shook her head. "He knows the game is up. He can't fight back against the board's decision. This is bigger than him now." But as confident as Bianca sounded, she knew there was more at stake than just a single manager losing his job. The undercurrent of racism and microaggressions that had followed her for years still lurked beneath the surface of every interaction in her professional life. This incident at the bank, while significant, was just one example of the constant struggle black professionals face in predominantly white spaces. For Bianca, the fight was far from over. It had never been about just getting a seat at the table. It was about reshaping the entire structure so that people like her, people who had been dismissed and oppressed, would no longer be denied their rightful place. Jamal, sensing the weight on her shoulders, spoke again. "I'll make sure the PR team is ready for the fallout. You know, some people are going to spin this into a scandal. They'll try to make it look like you were being unreasonable, like you overreacted." Bianca's lips tightened. "Let them. The truth is on our side. They'll twist it all they want, but the real story here is the way Charles treated me. He didn't even think twice about dismissing me. And I won't let that kind of behavior slide, not when it's happening under my watch." Jamal nodded in agreement. "You're right. The truth always comes out in the end." Just as Bianca was about to respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw an alert from the board. The message was brief but carried the weight of finality. "The decision has been made. Immediate removal. We support your actions completely. Our commitment to diversity and respect for all employees is non-negotiable." Bianca's heart swelled with a sense of validation. She had known that the board was behind her, but seeing it in writing solidified her position. She wasn't just a CEO anymore. She was a trailblazer, a symbol of what was possible when you refused to be broken by the system. But as much as she savored the moment, Bianca knew she had to keep moving forward. The next step in her plan was clear. She called an emergency meeting. The executive boardroom was filled with some of the most influential people in the financial world. Most of them were older, white men, who had seen the rise of their empire built on decades of traditional banking practices. They were not the easiest people to impress, and many of them had viewed Bianca with skepticism when she first stepped into her role as CEO. Now, however, there was no room for doubt. Bianca had not just earned her place at the table, she had proven her worth in a way that no one could ignore. She entered the room with confidence, her posture straight, her eyes unwavering. "Thank you all for joining me on such short notice," she began, her voice steady, every word calculated. "I wanted to address the situation that unfolded this morning. While some of you may have already heard about the incident with Charles, I want to make sure we are all aligned on how we handle it moving forward." A few board members shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged glances. Bianca could feel their hesitation, their uncertainty, but she refused to let it sway her. She had dealt with this kind of subtle resistance her whole life. "Let me be clear," she continued, her eyes scanning the room. "I will not allow this kind of behavior to persist under my leadership." Charles's actions were not just a simple misunderstanding, they were a blatant display of racial prejudice, and that is unacceptable. This incident is not isolated. It is a symptom of the culture we have allowed to exist in this institution, and I'm not willing to turn a blind eye to it anymore. A murmur ran through the room. A few of the board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, and one of them, a man named Thomas, spoke up. "Bianca, we understand the situation, but we need to be careful here. This is a sensitive issue, and we don't want to be seen as taking extreme measures." Bianca's eyes narrowed. "Extreme measures?" she echoed. "You think removing a manager who disrespected a customer, and a CEO, no less, is extreme? You think standing up for what's right is extreme?" Thomas hesitated. He wasn't prepared for this confrontation, and he certainly wasn't prepared for the resolve in Bianca's voice. "Look," Bianca said, her voice firm, "I'm not asking for anyone's approval. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Charles will not return to this bank. We will launch a full internal review of all staff conduct and implement mandatory diversity training across the organization. This isn't just about one man's failure. This is about a larger systemic issue, and we're going to address it head-on." The room fell silent. For the first time, the board members weren't sure how to respond. They had been accustomed to running things a certain way, quietly, behind closed doors. But this was different. Bianca wasn't going to let them hide behind their old, complacent ways. "I don't need your permission to do what's right," she continued. "I'm going to change this bank. And I'm going to change this industry. If you're not willing to support that vision, then I'll find others who will." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, one that no one in the room could ignore. Slowly, one by one, the board members began to nod in agreement. They could see the fire in Bianca's eyes, the determination in her voice. She wasn't just asking for change. She was demanding it. "All right, Bianca," Thomas said, his tone reluctant but resigned. "We'll back you. We'll do what needs to be done." Bianca smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of resolve, a smile that said she wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. The meeting concluded with a sense of purpose that had been lacking for years. Bianca knew that today had been a turning point, not just for her, but for the entire institution. The days of complacency were over. The days of ignoring systemic racism and microaggressions were over. She had made her stand. And now, the real work began. The battle for change wasn't going to be easy, but Bianca was ready. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every black person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And with every decision she made, every step she took, she was going to make sure that no one, no matter their color, no matter their background, would ever have to endure what she had. Bianca wasn't just a CEO. She was a force of change. And nothing would stop her. The room was still, the weight of Bianca's words settling like a heavy fog. She had taken a stand, one that reverberated not just through the walls of her bank but across every corporate boardroom, every institution, and every heart that had ever felt the sting of being overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Bianca had fought not just for herself, but for every person whose voice had been silenced in the name of power, privilege, and prejudice. As the meeting concluded, the board members filed out one by one, leaving Bianca standing alone in the room, her thoughts turning inward. The moment had been intense, a culmination of everything she had fought for. The path she had walked had never been easy, nor would it ever be. But today, something had shifted. Today she had won. But the irony, the brutal irony, was that she hadn't just won for herself. She had won for every single person who had walked into a room only to be told they didn't belong. She had been told no her entire life, told she was too much, too loud, too black. Every no had been a weight on her shoulders, but each time, she had risen, stronger, more determined. And now, here she was, the CEO of a powerful institution, her every step watched by those who had underestimated her from the beginning. Bianca wasn't just a symbol of success, she was a symbol of resistance. She was the embodiment of everything people said she couldn't be. And now, she had shown the world exactly what it meant when a black woman refused to be silenced. She looked down at the tablet in front of her, the board's decision officially in her hands. Charles was out. The bank would change. She could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on her. But it was a weight she had carried her whole life, and today, it felt a little lighter. But what struck her most was the lesson that had unfolded before her eyes, the lesson that she had learned the hard way. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. Bianca had fought for the truth to be seen. She had fought for respect, for her rightful place in this world. And now, with every decision she made, with every action she took, she had become the truth others would have to reckon with. She hadn't allowed herself to be swallowed by the lies of inferiority or invisibility that so many had tried to impose on her. She had confronted the lie head-on and shattered it into pieces. Her heart still raced as she stood up from the table, her legs steady, her mind clear. The dramatic irony of the moment was not lost on her. The same man who had once dismissed her, who had thought he could sweep her under the rug, was now the one in disgrace. He had been the one to underestimate her, to look at her and see only a threat to his power. But in the end, it was his own arrogance that had brought him down. What goes around comes around. Bianca knew this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The fight for justice, for equality, for a level playing field, it was ongoing. It was a struggle that required every ounce of her strength. But the victory today was undeniable. It wasn't about the humiliation of Charles. It wasn't about the applause of the board or the whispers of approval from her peers. It was about the simple fact that, for once, justice had been served. She smiled to herself, a small but powerful curve of her lips. Finally, I've been seen. And as she walked out of the boardroom, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway, she knew the battle wasn't over, but she had just won a crucial war. The banks, the systems, the structures, none of them would ever be the same again. Bianca had made sure of that. The lesson of Bianca's story is one that resonates beyond the confines of any one moment. It is the lesson of never allowing yourself to be defined by someone else's narrow vision of who you are. Bianca had always known what she was capable of, even when the world refused to acknowledge it. She knew that every challenge, every setback, every dismissal wasn't a reflection of her potential but a reflection of the system she was up against. The system had underestimated her, just as it had underestimated so many others. But she had proven them wrong. She had shown them that power is not always in the hands of those who have the loudest voices, the most money, or the highest status. Power is in the hands of those who are willing to fight for what's right, no matter how long it takes or how hard it gets. Bianca had fought for justice, not just for herself, but for every black person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The dramatic irony was clear. Charles, the manager who thought his position made him untouchable, had been brought down by the very thing he had sought to dismiss. The system that had once worked in his favor had ultimately failed him. And the woman he had tried to disregard, the one who was supposed to be invisible, had emerged victorious. Bianca had turned the tables. And in doing so, she had proven that justice, when pursued with courage, persistence, and an unshakable belief in oneself, will always find a way to triumph. The world may not always give you the respect you deserve, but in the end, it will have no choice but to reckon with the truth. And Bianca had just become the embodiment of that truth.